My name is Sam Wilson, and I did my ethnomusicology research project on jazz and hip hop, America's greatest black art forms. Quick introduction to this project. My name is Sam Wilson. I am a graduating senior at Rutgers University, majoring in jazz piano. As a jazz musician, I have a quite intricate understanding of the inner workings of jazz and a deep respect for the history, but I'm not nearly as familiar with hip hop music. So, the purpose of this project is to investigate hip hop music by interviewing a couple different active hip hop artists to find out just how the music works so I can get a better understanding of it, just like I do with jazz music. So, I interviewed three artists. The first one is Young Mallet, birth name Pierce Sparney Sparnroft. They are a 22-year-old hip hop artist from New York City. They're also a drummer and jazz vibraphonist, recently graduating from Montclair State with plans of going to grad school. Sparney has been tinkering with music for as long as they've been alive, having drawn influences from alternative, punk, hardcore, and emo music from a young age. Much of their music reflects personal struggles and experiences with mental health, addiction, and other vulnerable topics. Mahdi, birth name Samad Grays, is a 19-year-old hip-hop artist and producer from California. He's also a jazz pianist, studying jazz piano at Berklee College of Music with a minor in music production. Mahdi began playing piano at a very young age, studying classical piano at age 4. He played in his high school jazz band before discovering a passion for digital music production as well. When arriving at Berklee, he joined the group known as the New Bounce Collective, a jazz hip-hop fusion group that went viral online via Instagram videos of Mahdi freestyle rapping over jazz standards such as giant steps played over hip-hop style grooves. Young Benny, birth name Ben Guarino, is a 31-year-old hip-hop artist from Caldwell, New Jersey. He graduated from Keene University in 2017 with a degree in exercise science. He displayed remarkable athletic talent in college, playing on Keene University's varsity football team despite not playing football in high school. Unlike the other two artists, Benny has no formal music education, does not play any instruments, and did not study music in school. Yet, the quality of his music speaks volumes to his ability. Benny has been releasing music since 2019 and has a serious passion and drive to make a living in the industry. Now, just some historical context for both genres. Jazz and hip hop are both African American art forms. They both originated in the United States as a result of African American hardship and struggle. Jazz started around the late 1890s to early 1900s and 1910s in New Orleans. It originated in Congo Square, which was a place where African Americans would congregate to perform African musical traditions. Creoles of color, which were mixed people that were mixed African and French, also immigrated to New Orleans and would perpetuate a culture of live music playing in the local symphony bands. And with New Orleans being such a bustling city, there was a high demand for live music. And this demand generated a lot of work for brass bands and dance bands that would lay the foundation for big band jazz music. Now, another very important part of the roots of jazz are the blues. And the blues originated from African American work songs devised to ease the burdens of slave labor. Now, these songs, combined with street vendor cries and African American religious music, would ultimately culminate in the style of the blues, which can be generalized as a highly repetitive, simple vocal melody, often accompanied with just a guitar or banjo using as little as 2 or 3 chords. Now, the core of the blues is how it speaks from the soul and it expresses pain and hardship and that blue feeling that was all too common to laborers at the time. So, jazz has its roots in African American struggle, and hip hop is very similar as well, having originated in the Bronx in the 1970s. Now, during the 1970s, the Bronx, New York City, was poverty-stricken. It was filled with crime, gangs, slumlords, abandoned buildings. So the living conditions for African American youths at the time were very poor. They had a lot of time left to their own devices with very little adult supervision. As a result, a DJ jam party culture began to emerge in the 1970s, and a lot of people accredit the birth of hip-hop to DJ Kool Herc's first big DJ jam party hosted August 11th, 1973. Hip-hop was born out of a disco and funk musical tradition where DJs would take disco and funk records and spin them on turntables, and they would practice switching between records to keep the breakbeat parts of the song going, which were the parts that were the most fun to dance to. And this started the whole breakdancing b-boy culture, as well as the MCing culture that would ultimately culminate into hip-hop. Now, the main parallels here are that both jazz and hip-hop are African-American traditions that both really culminated out of hardship and struggle due to systemic racism in the country. So, just one example of an interesting historical parallel and commercialization. Both hip-hop and jazz music had very interesting scenarios play out for their first commercially released records. With jazz, the first recorded record was Livery Stable Blues by the Dixieland Jazz Band in 1916. Now, the controversy behind this one is the Dixieland Jazz Band is an all-white band in a primarily black art form. They also, although it's not stated in this picture, they intentionally spelled the word jazz with two S's as a play on the word ass, intentionally being disrespectful to the black art form. Another thing about this record is Livery Stable Blues is more of a comedic piece where the instruments are played to imitate farm animals and other funny noises. So it comes off as more of a novelty record than serious music. Now, despite that, the record was still very commercially successful and opened the eyes of the public to this new emerging genre. Similarly with hip-hop, the first release record was Rapper's Delight by the Sugar Hill Gang in 1979. Now, this record also generated controversy as the artists responsible for recording and writing the record were considered to be kind of inferior by the underground MCs at the time. Interestingly enough, with both genres, the first opportunity to be recorded was declined. So with jazz, Freddie Keppard was a jazz cornetist during the 1910s and 20s, and he was approached by producers that wanted to record the first jazz record. He declined the opportunity in fear that other musicians would steal his stuff. In hip-hop, DJ and upcoming MC Lovebug Starsky was DJing at a club, and he was MCing on the mic, and a producer saw just how lively the whole crowd interaction was and wanted to capture this on a record. They asked Lovebug Starsky if he wanted to record a record, and he declined, as he thought the notion of recording such an underground genre was silly at the time, and it was more important for him to focus on his live DJ work. Anyways, when Rapper's Delight dropped in 1979, a lot of the underground MCs were not so happy about it. They were thinking, who the hell are these guys? Like, this music isn't good. We've been doing this stuff for years now. In particular, a lot of MCs had their specific rhymes stolen, like Grandmaster Caz, who was one of the founding MCs and most notable names in hip-hop at the time. A lot of his specific rhymes and bars were straight up stolen and used in this record. So it did generate quite a lot of controversy from the actual artists at the time. Despite that, the commercialization of the record proved to be very, very fruitful for the genre as a whole. Rapper's Delight was played very much after its release, introducing the country to this new genre based more on a spoken word than a sung melody. Another part of historical context with talking about NWA, which stands for a slur that starts with N, ends with A, and then with attitude. Now, their hallmark album, Straight Outta Compton, forever changed the industry of the creative arts. Straight Outta Compton was a very controversial record as it contained a lot of very expletive language and talked about a lot of very sensitive and vulgar topics. For example, in Compton at the time, there was a big problem with police brutality and systemic racism and inequality in general. So the group sought to expose these issues with their landmark album, specifically in one of the tracks on the album called F the Police, which is set up as a mock courtroom trial where each rapper lays down a verse talking about their own experiences with police brutality. Now, in an interview with Kendrick Lamar, Ice Cube, one of the chief lyricists of the group, had this to say about NWA's impact on music. We not only changed music, we changed pop culture all over the world. We did that by making it all right for artists to be themselves. You no longer had to be squeaky clean. We opened the floodgates for artists who wanted to work on this side, artists who wanted to be raw. We became examples not only for musicians, but for shows like South Park. The rawness wasn't in the world until NWA said it was okay to be yourself. There's the world before NWA, and there's the world after. So lyricism is a major topic in rap and hip-hop. And it was one of the main things I got to talk to my artists about. So I got to talk to each artist about their takes on lyricism, what kind of stories they want to tell in their music, and stuff like that. So when I asked Madi about what inspires his lyrics, he told me, it really depends on what I'm rapping on. A lot of the times, I have to pick myself up, or maybe it's a pick-me-up for other people. No matter what, you have to keep going. I have other songs where it may be an inspiration from an experience, like with a girl or something like that. You can draw from all types of experiences, personal experiences, relationships, how you're feeling. Maybe you're feeling angry. You write some crazy stuff off that. You feel like you're the shit. Then you talk about it. You talk your shit. So he's basically telling me that you can draw inspiration from all different kinds of sources, and a lot of the time it can be based off of your lived experiences and your memories, your current emotional state. It can be all kinds of different things, and your own personal experiences are a great source material to draw from. When I asked young Benny about it, he said, the stories that I want to tell are just everyday moments of my life, the moment I'm going through, the things I'm feeling in that moment. I want to convey my story as far as who I am as a person. If you found Tax Day, which was a track that he released in 2019, you could hear the different styles, like the sadder, slower tempo stuff, talking about some of the things that I've been through. And then there's also the side of me that likes to have fun. I go out and party and stuff too. So I'm kind of just showing everyone that's just who I am, just to relate to everybody. So Benny has a very similar take on lyricism, where it's a lot about just lived experiences. Now, his persona as a rapper is much more embedded in that glamorous side of hip-hop, where he talks about a lot of girls and partying, which can be reflected in his lyrical material. Now, that said, he also has slower tracks with more vulnerable songs where he talks about more personal experiences. Tracks such as Let's Link or Slide Out are very good examples of that whole party and glamour lifestyle on display in his lyrics. However, on his release Nothing Is Forever, which is a slower tempo song talking about a childhood best friend drifting apart due to drug use, as well as difficult times with an ex-girlfriend and her family who had judged Benny for his hip-hop career, you can see a lot of vulnerability on that track, culminating in one of my favorite bars from his, I never meant to hurt you with this effing pencil, and now you got me crying on this instrumental. Young Mallet, aka Sparny, is probably the most expressive of the three artists that I interviewed when talking about their lyrical inspiration. Unlike Madi and Benny, Sparny could care less about the commercial success of their music. On the opening track of his second EP, Sparny Plastler Met, Sparny even says on the intro track, I made this album knowing it's not commercially palatable and will straight up sound bad to some people, and honestly, I don't care. The album is a very deeply personal autobiographical collection of unique soundscapes, inspired by many different genres such as jazz, Midwest emo, and spoken word poets such as Sylvia Plath. When talking to Sparny, he said, "One thing I'm very passionate about is the conversation of mental health. The whole emo rap thing that happened in the late 2000s and 2010s kind of opened the door for that, talking about mental health in the hip-hop space. But as soon as it became commercialized heavily, it became a lot more like, I'm addicted to drugs, I'm popping Percocets, I'm sipping lean and smoking weed, I have an unhealthy relationship with sex, I have an unhealthy relationship with my past traumas." It's very surface level. I try not to discredit any of these artists, but my goal is to go a little deeper. Sparny has been dealing with some very intense mental health issues from a very young age, including bipolar disorder, ADHD-like symptoms, as well as substance abuse. His mental health experiences have been very intense and personal, and they have been used as a vehicle for his music for some time now. Sparny. Nobody's really talking about things like self-harm or severe drug addiction. There's the glamorous side of it, but nobody's talking about accidentally ODing and waking up in your own vomit and piss. There's a large part of the world in America and whatnot that views being gay and bisexual as something that's sinful, or as something that's going to corrupt their family or corrupt their worlds. Our voices get silenced constantly, and the best thing I can do as a member of this community is to make my voice not only heard, but as loud and as obnoxious as possible. So as a bisexual, non-binary artist in the hip-hop world, which is not very common, Sparny takes it upon himself to be a representative for the communities that he's a part of, specifically with the LGBT. And this can be seen in his music as well. For example, Goofy in a Cruel World from his second EP explores relationships with both men and women in the same song, providing a unique perspective on bisexuality rarely seen in the hip-hop space. One lyric that I found amusing was, "So I broke up with him, then I kissed his sister, then I effed their cousin." So, along with sexuality, race and ethnicity also play an important role in hip-hop as well. So, I got to talk to Mahdi and Sparny about this specifically. Mahdi, as an African-American artist, had this to say when asked about race. "Black culture is a big influence for me, musically speaking. Jazz is Black American music. Hip-hop is also Black American music. R&B, soul, funk. It all feels intertwined. African Americans were a bit disconnected from our homeland, which is Africa. So jazz and hip-hop are cultures that were birthed specifically out of African Americans in America based on the culture that has occurred here. It's really near and dear to myself and my heart because this is us. If there's anything for me to grab onto that would feel true, it's this." So, Mahdi takes deep pride in the African American traditions and cultures that have sprung up in the United States in the past couple centuries. He deeply identifies with jazz and hip-hop and embraces it deeply to feel pride in his culture. Now, Sparny, as a white artist, had quite a contrasting thing to say about it. As someone who is half white and half Colombian, he had some pretty interesting perspectives to provide. Sparny. "Middle-class white people don't have as much to speak upon in an African American art form that is based in African American trauma as much as the people of that culture. I very much view myself as a guest in hip-hop." So, Sparny shows a deep respect for the two genres as well, and knowing their historical context, is very careful not to appropriate the cultures as a white artist. By calling himself a guest in hip-hop in a traditionally black art form, he is not so much reappropriating the hip-hop culture than he is perpetuating it in a respectful way. He continues to say, "And I think to look at hip-hop and jazz as two separate entities completely disrespects the entire culture and history of African American music." And this resonates with a quote that Mahdi told me. "For me, jazz and hip-hop are like the same thing. They're both in this conglomerate." Oops, sorry. Now, the two genres also hold a lot of similarity in their actual live performative practices. Sparny was telling me about how he practices hip hop in a very similar way to jazz music. During the lockdown, COVID, where they had a lot of free time, he was telling me about how he was practicing and learning different verses from his favorite rappers like the Wu-Tang Clan or Rockhampton. He told me I would take small portions of verses at a super slow speed and just recite them over and over. And then it became a matter of narrowing down which artists I specifically wanted to learn from, just like transcribing in jazz. So, Sparny used the same techniques that he learned from being a jazz musician to practice and develop his skills as a hip hop artist as well. It's all very similar things. Like with jazz, you listen to a solo, you transcribe it, you learn the language. Now that's in your vocabulary. And it works the same way in hip hop. You listen to a verse you like, you transcribe it, you learn it, you commit it to memory, and now you have access to a bunch of different rhyme schemes and types of vocabulary that you can use in your own music. And Sparny was telling me specifically about how slow practice with a metronome specifically helped him conquer a speech impediment, which you would never even know that he had just from speaking to him, as his practice has helped him overcome that greatly. When I talked to Madi, he was telling me about these things called ciphers, which are informal gatherings of hip-hop artists and rappers with the intention of jamming together on a beat, very, very similar to a jazz jam session. He told me, you put on a beat and then everybody just takes turns. It's just when it feels right. You're like, oh, this person's finished rapping. All right, now I'm in. Same thing as somebody's solo at the jazz jam session. So the parallels between ciphers and jazz jam sessions are kind of uncanny. They're incredibly similar. Both genres have an immense focus on individual soloists and on their ability to improvise over an accompaniment. Now, there are definitely differences between the two musics as well, where rap can be a little more competitive and jazz can be a little more collaborative when you're playing with a live band, but the spirit of individual improvisation with multiple participants is still there, and there's a clear parallel between the genres. Now, there are many other similarities between the two genres as well, and as much as I would have liked to use all the material from my interviews, this project would easily be double, triple, or quadruple the length. So, I'm going to choose to wrap it up here. I got to talk to 3 very, very talented and interesting artists, and I got a lot of insight from them in those conversations, a lot of which I did not have time to include here. But as a conclusion, I was able to conduct a very detailed investigation of the hip-hop genre by talking to 3 very talented individuals. I was able to observe some of the similarities between the two genres, both in their historical context and their live performative aspects. They're both vehicles of expression, and they both work as systems of combating systemic racism, such as the highly controversial works of NWA, well, controversial at the time, as well as, there was a lot of jazz activity during the civil rights movement, the works of Charles Mingus. I'm very grateful for my opportunity to have spoken with Madi, Young Benny, and Young Mallet. They were all very insightful conversations. Hip-hop is, in the present day, the most listened genre in the world. And there's a very good reason for that. It is very relatable. It sounds good. And it takes the power of the spoken word to the next level. And I think it is every bit deserving of that top spot. And now, to end off, I just wanted to share my favorite records from the artists that I got to interview. Now, Madi, as a hip-hop artist, is still very early on in his discography. He only has one single out called All Right, a collaboration with another producer called Sync. It's a very upbeat and lively tune with, inspirational lyrics and a catchy hook. Young Benny released an album called What Happens After 12, which has a bunch of very, very solid tracks on it, ranging from different tempos, styles, and talking about different topics, but very deeply embedded in that rap vein. Young Mallet's first EP was called Unapologetically Me, which is more of an autobiographical album, just like his second one as well. And there's a lot of very, very heavy stuff in this album where he talks about a lot of sensitive topics, such as mental health, drug addiction, and sexuality as well. One of my favorite tracks from that is called Roy G. Biv. And Roy G. Biv, those are the letters of the colors in the rainbow. And it's a topic talking about sexuality and the confusion that comes along with that. Anyways, to wrap up, I think listening to any of these three pieces of music would be a great service to the three artists that I interviewed. And I think I learned a lot from this project, and I'm very happy that I was able to get it done. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.